There exists within you a fortress that no narcissist can breach. A psychological strength so profound that it transforms you from victim to untouchable. Carl Jung discovered that certain individuals possess what he called psychological sovereignty, an inner authority so unshakable that narcissists not only fail to control them, but actively fear their presence. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Carl Jung. Onward thinkers, my name is Mister Halvig, and you're watching The Rational Wise. Carl Jung spent decades studying the darkest corners of human psychology, and what he discovered about narcissistic behavior will forever change how you see manipulation. According to Jung's groundbreaking research, narcissists operate from what he termed psychological parasitism. They literally feed off the emotional energy and authentic power of others. But Jung made a startling observation. Certain individuals are completely immune to this parasitic feeding. They possess an inner strength so genuine, so unassailable, that narcissists cannot extract a single drop of psychological nourishment from them. Today we journey into Jung's most empowering discoveries about psychological invincibility. You will learn to recognize the 7 unmistakable signs that you have transcended the narcissist's reach, that you have become what Jung called psychologically untouchable. By the end of this exploration, you will understand not only why narcissists fear your strength, but how to weaponize your authenticity into an impenetrable shield against all forms of manipulation. Sign 7. You no longer seek their validation. Our 7th sign, and the first we'll explore, that betrays your psychological invincibility, is the complete absence of validation-seeking behavior. According to Carl Jung, most people operate from what he called external psychological dependency. They require constant affirmation from others to maintain their sense of self-worth. Narcissists exploit this dependency like master puppeteers, offering and withdrawing approval to control their victims' emotional states. Jung discovered that psychological maturation involves what he termed internal validation genesis, the development of an inner authority so robust that external opinions become merely interesting data rather than emotional necessities. When you reach this state, you have effectively severed the narcissist's primary control mechanism. Consider the ancient Greek philosopher Diogenes of Sinope, who chose a life of poverty and social rejection. When Alexander the Great offered to grant him any wish, Diogenes simply asked him to step out of his sunlight. This wasn't disrespect, it was profound inner authority. Diogenes embodied what Jung called psychological self-sufficiency, a sense of worth and purpose that needed nothing from the outside. In today's context, this shows as total indifference to the narcissist's opinion campaigns. When they try to hurt you with criticism, you respond with genuine curiosity, not defensiveness. When they manipulate with false praise, you stay unmoved. You have become what Jung called emotionally autonomous, relying on no external source for your psychological stability. Practice what Jung called internal validation exercises. Each morning, spend 5 minutes acknowledging your own worth, independent of any external feedback. Additionally, when someone attempts to manipulate you through approval or disapproval, pause and ask yourself, what would I think of this situation if their opinion carried no weight whatsoever? Sign 6. Their manipulation tactics amuse rather than wound you. The 6th sign reveals itself in your emotional response to their psychological warfare. According to Carl Jung, fear and emotional reactivity are the narcissist's primary weapons. They deploy what Jung termed emotional terrorism, calculated attacks designed to destabilize your psychological equilibrium. But Jung discovered something remarkable about individuals who have achieved true psychological strength. Manipulation attempts actually become sources of dark amusement rather than pain. Jung explained this phenomenon through his concept of shadow integration. When you have fully acknowledged and accepted the darker aspects of human nature, both in yourself and others, you develop what he called psychological immunity. You recognize manipulation not as a personal attack, but as a predictable pattern of wounded psychology. You become the observer, not the victim. History provides us with Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who faced constant political manipulation and betrayal. In his personal writings, later published as Meditations, Marcus reveals how he learned to view his enemies' schemes with philosophical detachment. He wrote of finding genuine fascination in the psychological mechanisms that drove people to deception and cruelty. This wasn't callousness. It was what Jung would recognize as transcendent awareness. Today, this appears as a full shift in your emotional landscape. When the narcissist tries to trigger jealousy, you find it almost comical. When they gaslight you, you observe the complex psychology behind their distortion. You've developed what Jung called the observer consciousness, the ability to watch drama unfold without being emotionally hijacked. When facing manipulation attempts, practice Jung's psychological anthropology technique. Study the narcissist's behavior as if you were a scientist observing an interesting specimen. Ask yourself, what psychological wound is driving this behavior? This shifts you from victim consciousness to researcher consciousness. Sign 5. You set boundaries that are absolute and non-negotiable. The fifth sign manifests in your relationship with personal boundaries. Jung discovered that healthy individuals possess what he termed psychological sovereignty, an unshakable sense of where they end and others begin. Narcissists specifically target people with permeable boundaries because they require access to others' psychological territory to maintain their inflated self-image. According to Jung's research, boundary setting is not merely behavioral, it's a fundamental expression of psychological health. He observed that individuals who have achieved true inner strength don't negotiate their boundaries. They simply enforce them with the quiet authority of natural law. Jung explained this through his analysis of healthy psychological development. Mature individuals understand that their time, energy, and emotional space are finite resources that must be carefully stewarded. They recognize that allowing others to violate these boundaries is not kindness. It's psychological self-harm. Consider the story of Eleanor Roosevelt, who evolved from an insecure, people-pleasing young woman into one of history's most formidable human rights advocates. Facing criticism and manipulation from political opponents, she built what she called an interior castle, a mental space no external force could invade. She learned to say no without justification, to walk away from unproductive conversations, and to protect her energy from draining situations. Today, this shows as your full comfort in disappointing others when boundaries are crossed. You don't explain, justify, or negotiate, just calmly state your limits with the authority of someone beyond needing approval for their basic needs. Your boundaries become invisible walls of steel. Practice what Jung called boundary fortification. Identify your 3 most important psychological boundaries and commit to enforcing them without exception for 30 days. When someone challenges these boundaries, respond with simple statements. That doesn't work for me, or I'm not available for that. Sign 4. You respond to their provocations with strategic silence. The 4th sign reveals itself in your mastery of psychological warfare through strategic non-engagement. Carl Jung discovered that narcissists require what he termed psychological fuel, emotional reactions that feed their sense of power and control. Your anger, fear, confusion, and even your explanations provide them with the psychological nourishment they desperately need. Jung's analysis revealed that strategic silence is not passive withdrawal. It's active psychological warfare. When you refuse to provide the emotional reactions narcissists crave, you essentially starve them of their primary psychological food source. This creates what Jung called narcissistic frustration, a psychological state that often drives them to increasingly desperate manipulation attempts. The philosopher Lao Tzu understood this over 2,500 years ago. In the Tao Te Ching, he described the power of strategic emptiness, how water overcomes rock not through force, but through persistent, gentle pressure that exposes its weakness. Jung saw this as deep psychological truth. Sometimes the most powerful response is no response. In ancient Chinese military strategy, this was called defeating the enemy without fighting. Sun Tzu wrote how non-engagement could drain opponents through their own aggression. Jung applied the same idea to psychological warfare. Narcissists often destroy themselves when denied the emotional fuel they crave. Today, this shows as your complete comfort with silence amid provocations. When they bait you into arguments, you don't engage. When they escalate with outrageous behavior, you stay unmoved. You've mastered what Jung called the power of psychological unavailability. Develop what Jung termed strategic unresponsiveness. When faced with obvious manipulation attempts, implement a 24-hour rule before responding to any non-emergency communication. This gives you time to craft responses from a place of psychological strength rather than emotional reactivity. If you're enjoying the content, don't forget to hit the like button. It helps more than you think. Now let's continue. Sign 3. They begin desperately seeking your attention through increasingly dramatic tactics. The third sign manifests in the narcissist's escalating desperation to recapture your psychological attention. According to Carl Jung, narcissists operate from what he called attention addiction, a psychological compulsion that requires constant validation of their existence through others' focus and emotional energy. When you withdraw this attention, they experience what Jung termed psychological withdrawal, similar to a drug addict being denied their substance of choice. Jung's research revealed that narcissists view attention as a zero-sum resource. In their distorted psychology, your lack of focus on them represents not just personal rejection, but a fundamental threat to their psychological survival. This creates what Jung called attention panic, a state where they will employ increasingly dramatic and destructive tactics to reclaim your focus. Nero perfectly illustrates this dynamic. As Roman emperor, he grew increasingly dependent on public attention and approval. When the Senate and citizens withdrew their support, his behavior became erratic and dramatic. Nero even burned Rome to regain the spotlight. This wasn't political strategy, but a desperate act triggered by attention withdrawal, exactly what Jung would recognize. Today, this shows as the narcissist's transparent attempts to provoke any reaction from you. They create false emergencies, fake crises with mutual friends, or act self-destructively to grab your attention. You see these for what they are: desperate thrashing from someone drowning in their own emptiness. Their desperation reveals your power. Practice what Jung called attention sovereignty. Consciously decide where you invest your psychological attention each day. When narcissists attempt to hijack your focus through drama, remind yourself, this person's psychological emergency is not my responsibility. Sign 2. You no longer feel the need to defend your reality. The second sign reveals itself in your complete comfort with allowing others to misunderstand you. Carl Jung discovered that psychologically healthy individuals possess what he termed reality confidence, an unshakable trust in their own perceptions and experiences that requires no external validation or defense. According to Jung's analysis, narcissists employ what he called reality manipulation as their most sophisticated weapon. They systematically attack their victims' confidence in their own perceptions, memories, and judgments. This creates what Jung recognized as psychological dependency. Victims become reliant on the narcissist's version of reality because they no longer trust their own. Jung explained that recovering from narcissistic manipulation requires what he termed reality reclamation, the process of trusting your own psychological authority above all external opinions. When you achieve this state, others' attempts to distort your reality become irrelevant because you no longer require their agreement to know what you experience. Consider Galileo Galilei, who faced the era's most powerful institution trying to make him deny his own observations. The Catholic Church demanded he recant his heliocentric findings, threatening torture and death. Though Galileo publicly submitted to save his life, he never lost faith in his observations. Legend says that after his forced recantation, he whispered, "And yet it moves," referring to Earth's orbit around the sun. Today, this shows as complete indifference to others' gaslighting attempts. When they deny events, you don't argue. You calmly hold your version of reality. When they call you too sensitive or overreacting, you don't defend yourself. You trust your feelings as valid insight into your state. Develop what Jung called reality anchoring practices. Keep a private journal where you record significant interactions and your emotional responses to them. This creates an objective record that reinforces your trust in your own perceptions. Sign 1. They begin to avoid you entirely. The first and most powerful sign that you have achieved psychological invincibility is the narcissist's complete avoidance of your presence. According to Carl Jung, narcissists are psychological predators who instinctively recognize when potential prey has become too dangerous to approach. When you embody authentic strength, confidence, and emotional independence, you trigger what Jung called predator avoidance responses in narcissistic personalities. Jung discovered that narcissists operate from what he termed psychological cowardice. Beneath their grandiose exterior lies a terrified child who cannot tolerate being truly seen or challenged. When they encounter someone who sees through their facade and remains unimpressed by their manipulation tactics, they experience what Jung called exposure terror, the devastating fear of being revealed as the psychological fraud they know themselves to be. This avoidance represents the ultimate victory in psychological warfare. Jung explained that narcissists can only maintain their inflated self-image in the presence of people who participate in their delusions or can be manipulated into submission. Your authentic strength creates what Jung termed psychological incongruence. Your very presence contradicts their carefully constructed false reality. You have become their mirror of truth. The ancient Greek philosopher Antisthenes, founder of Cynic philosophy, embodied true psychological authenticity. His steadfast commitment to truth and virtue made corrupt politicians and shallow socialites avoid him, knowing he wouldn't join their pretenses or validate their false selves. Embrace what Jung called authentic presence cultivation. Continue developing your genuine self without concern for others' comfort levels. Your authenticity naturally repels those who cannot tolerate truth and attracts those capable of genuine connection. You have explored Jung's most empowering insights on psychological invincibility. Together, these 7 signs form what Jung called the architecture of inner strength, a fortress no external force can breach. You've learned to recognize validation, independence, emotional immunity, firm boundaries, strategic silence, attention sovereignty, reality confidence, and authentic presence as true psychological power. But Jung's final insight transforms this knowledge into lived wisdom. Psychological strength isn't a destination. It's a daily practice of choosing authenticity over approval, truth over comfort, and inner authority over external validation. The narcissists in your life aren't enemies, but teachers, revealing where your psychological work is unfinished. Use this knowledge not as a weapon, but as a mirror for growth. Jung believed everyone can claim psychological sovereignty. The question is whether you will. True strength serves your freedom and inspires others to recognize their own potential for invincibility. When narcissists can no longer control you, it's not because you become cruel or closed-hearted. It's because you become whole. You've integrated what Jung called your shadow, accepted your authentic self, and developed the inner authority that makes external manipulation impossible. What sign resonates most deeply with your own journey towards psychological invincibility? Have you experienced the profound shift from victim consciousness to untouchable strength? Let me know what you think in the comments. I read every single one. And of course, subscribe for more high-value content. You are not at the mercy of others' psychological games. You're not responsible for healing those who hurt you, nor obligated to stay small to ease their limits. You are sovereign, untouchable, and free to live the authentic life Jung knew was your birthright. The narcissist's fear proves your power. Their avoidance shows your victory. Their failure to control you is the ultimate proof of your psychological evolution. As we've explored the profound strength that makes you untouchable to narcissists, your psychological invincibility, as Jung would say, it's clear your inner power is truly a force. And if you're wondering how that same powerful presence affects others, especially when it comes to attracting certain reactions, you'll want to dive into our next discussion. Click right here for our video on 7 signs your powerful aura attracts envy from others. It's a crucial next step in understanding your authentic power and navigating the world with the wisdom we champion here at The Rational Wise. Onward, thinkers!